accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Welcome back, Green Lantern fans, to the podcast of OA. This is episode number 192. I'm your co-host, Myron Rumsey, and joined with me is our good friend, Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, we got a Guy Gardner episode tonight.
I know, man. Guy Gardner theme. I love it. I'm stoked. I was thinking about this all day today. I was like, man, it's going to be a good time. Because we haven't touched his base in a while, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Guy's a really good character, and we're going to go back. A lot of people that joined Green Lantern and got interested in Green Lantern during the Johns run knows the New 52 origins of Guy Gardner and his year one story, essentially. And we're going to go back to 1993 to when Guy Gardner had his own book, and there was a 4-part story that was called Yesterday's Sins. And it kind of gives you a year one story of Guy Gardner, a proper year one story. And it's a lot different than the New 52. So I hope people are interested in hearing what's different if they've never read this particular story.
Yeah, it was good stuff.
Yep, definitely. And we also have, obviously the Know Your Core segment. And you're gonna of course shine a spotlight on Guy Gardner, keeping the Guy theme going.
Oh, yeah.
And we've got a lot of listener feedback, a lot of comments about the first issue of the Geoffrey Thorne run. So it'll be fun to go through that stuff. In terms of Green Lantern news, there has not been a whole lot of news. There was on Twitter about a week or so ago a post from Mitch Gerads and Joss Williamson, and it showed kind of the cover to Infinite Frontier number 3, and the cover had a white-gloved hand, kind of a decaying hand, reaching for a Black Lantern ring, and over the hand it says, "Who is the Black Lantern?" So, a lot of conjecture over who's going to be this Black Lantern character in Infinite Frontier. Thoughts range from Hal because of the white glove to any number of characters. And, it could be a red herring that people are thinking it's a Green Lantern character. It could be any character who's got a white glove. So.
Yeah, I don't have any ideas. You?
No, not really. Not really. I'm waiting to see what happens with it. I mean, some people said maybe it's Jade because Jade is going to be in the book, but I don't know. I think anything's an open choice. So,
it's going to be cool. Josh Williamson, I like him. I like him as a writer. He did great with the Flash, and I miss him on the Flash, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is another title that I don't read anymore. I dropped a lot of titles from DC recently.
You ain't kidding.
I mean, I'm probably going to pick up Morrison's Superman, the Authority one, but I don't read Superman anymore. I dropped Flash. They're not doing an Aquaman one. Dropped Wonder Woman. Dropped Justice League. Yeah, I got slim pickings.
Me too. I'm not buying any DC right now, which is the first time since the mid-90s for me.
Wow.
I did pick up Geiger, the Jeff Johns Gary Frank book, and
yeah, I read that. That was pretty good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to reading more of that. My comic shop was like, "You're not buying anything." For the longest time, I was buying probably 85 to 90% of the DC catalog at one point for quite some time, and it just has dwindled over time.
Yeah.
So anyway, we've got some good Guy Gardner conversation. I'm really excited to talk about this stuff because Guy is just a character that people love to hate, but there's so much more going on with that character. And there's a very rich history there that comes a lot through this run that we're going to talk about. So why don't we take a quick break and you can do your Know Your Core segment on Guy Gardner, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about Guy Gardner's issues 11 through 14.
All right. Sounds great.
Listen up, Lanterns. It's time you took the oath with Green Lantern John Stewart. In brightest day, in blackest night, don't let the podcast of Oa escape your sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's light.
All right, fellow Owens, and welcome back to another segment of Know Your Core. And this week, we're keeping it themed, so we're going to go with Guy Gardner, the one and only. First appearance, Green Lantern Volume 2, number 59. Character created by John Broome and Gil Kane. home space sector is 2814 of Earth. Guy Gardner was from Baltimore, where he was raised by his parents, Raleigh and Peggy Gardner. Raleigh was an abusive alcoholic who beat Gardner repeatedly. Gardner worked very hard in school to try to win his father's approval, yet all his achievements were dismissed out of hand. Instead, Raleigh lavished attention and compliments upon Gardner's older brother, Mace, who, it seemed to Gardner, could do no wrong in their father's eyes. Gardner's only escape at this time was General Glory comic books, even modeling his bowl haircut on Glory's sidekick, Ernie. During his mid-teens, Gardner finally decided that nothing he ever did was going to be good enough to win his father's affection, and the young boy became a juvenile delinquent. Gardner was straightened out from his downward spiral by his older brother, who had become a police officer. Mace's pressure and advice knocked some sense into Gardner, and Gardner then went to college, working his way through to support himself and emerging from the University of Michigan with a bachelor's degree in education and psychology. During his time at the University of Michigan, he also became a nationally renowned football hero, but had to abandon that career due to injuries. But after college, Gardner worked as a social welfare caseworker, dealing with prison inmates and their rehabilitation. He abandoned this line of work, however, fearing it brought out his innate, more aggressive nature. Moving on, he became a teacher for children with disabilities. And there you have it, fellow Owens. A long-winded background history of Guy Gardner, but well worth it.
What up, dweebs? This is Guy Gardner. You're listening to the podcast of OA.
Great job with the Know Your Core segment, Phil. Very appropriate as we talk about Guy Gardner. And just to kind of set the stage, this is a story that was printed back in 1993. So at the time, you had Gerard Jones on the Emerald, on the Green Lantern book, and on Mosaic with John Stewart. And then this series was running concurrently to those. And this particular set of issues, 11 through 14, were written by Chuck Dixon with art by Joe Staton, who really kind of has a great reputation with Guy in particular. But if you remember back a couple episodes, we did a story about Yalan Gur, and we talked about the 50th anniversary issue of Green Lantern, which was volume 3, number 19. And we were talking about at the time, John was dealing with how do I deal with the Mosaic, and Hal was struggling with how do I rebuild the core. And again, that was back in issue 19. In issue 25, about 6 months later, he's done rebuilding the core, and he comes back to Earth to reclaim his sector. And the Guardians basically let Hal and Guy decide who's going to be the Green Lantern. So Hal comes back to talk to some sense to Guy. And of course, the Justice League aren't really thrilled with Guy at this point either. And Guy's response to this is to challenge Hal to a fight where the loser quits the core. It sounds like a WWE match now, doesn't it?
No doubt.
Loser quits the core. And they have a really interesting fight. And in the beginning, they're using the rings, and John and some Green Lanterns and the Justice League show up and are like, listen, guys, you're destroying a city here. You need to tone it down. So the two of them decide we're going to do it mano a mano, no power rings. And it's a really interesting, a really neat fight, because Hal realizes that at this point, Guy's been using his ring to keep himself kind of younger, and he's got all the advantages that Hal doesn't have, because Hal's, this is a gray-haired Hal. And Hal basically in the end decides to absorb all of the rage and energy that Guy throws at him until he doesn't have anything left in the tank, and then Hal takes him out. So Hal wins the fight. Guy surrenders his ring, and then he has he tries to become like this non-powered vigilante character, Guy does. And he finally decides, this isn't going to cut it. These villains are too powerful, and he's got too much of a reputation in his time as a Green Lantern. So he sets out on a quest to get some power and to kind of regain his identity. And to kind of abbreviate a long story, he ends up on Oa in a crypt of the Green Lanterns, and he basically takes Sinestro's ring. And so this launches Guy's comic series where it's Guy in a yellow ring, being a hero on his own with no rules other than his own. His outfit is very much like his Green Lantern outfit, but it's different colored. It doesn't have a Green Lantern logo on it. It's got a G on it. He's got cowboy boots instead of those big boots that you used to see on Guy. And his ring doesn't use a battery to recharge. Instead, it has to be used against Green Lanterns so it can absorb some of the Green Lantern residual energy and store it in the ring. So Guy's having these ongoing struggles with the Green Lanterns because he needs them in order to repower his ring. So they get to issue 11 of the series, and one of the things that Guy never really had was a lot of background. Basically, you had the issue 59 which you spoke about, and it didn't really give you a lot of background for Guy. So Chuck Dixon and Joe Staton craft this story where they have Guy abducted by some aliens, and the aliens are using these small creatures to extract his memories because their plan, these aliens are called the Drawl. These Drawl are trying to capture Green Lanterns and use them as sleeper agents. And when they come to Sector 2814, they were going to abduct Hal, but they see that Guy's ring is actually stronger, so they decide to abduct Guy instead. And in using these creatures to read Guy's memories, we get flashbacks on Guy's initial years as a young person and his life. And this is where we find out more about why is Guy the way he is. Because when we see Guy in Green Lantern 59 and in Green Lantern 87 and forward up until Crisis, he's a pretty straight-laced guy. You know, he's a teacher to special ed kids and so on. And when he gets revived during Crisis on Infinite Earths, up comes this parody of machismo that has lasted with him since. And there really was no explanation as to why does he feel this way. I mean, obviously he has a chip on his shoulder because he wasn't picked for the power ring, and he always feels he was second best. And that's part of what drives him, and part of his tension with Hal is driven by that, and that, you know, he's not good enough kind of thing. So this whole thing starts out, and this first issue is really kind of neat. You know, you see some other Green Lanterns. This actually, the Green Lantern Guy Gardner number 11 is the first appearance of Graf Torrin, the first appearance of Vaz, and then there are 3 other Green Lanterns who don't have a lot of lasting appeal, but RRU 92, Japak, and Bivix are the other Green Lanterns. And in this first issue has all of their first appearances. Vaz, as we know, becomes the keeper of the science cells. RRU 92 is interesting. He's a kind of an android, and there's basically a rumor amongst the Green Lanterns that he's actually a manhunter.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
But
he kind of looks like one, though.
Kind of, yeah. And I like how you pointed out in your Know Your Core segment, in this first issue, when we've cut back in time, we see Guy when he's a young boy, and you see there's a General Glory poster on the wall, and he's reading the General Glory comic book. And it's a callback to how this whole issue starts out, because he's fighting alongside General Glory in the beginning of the book. But you see little Guy Gardner with the bowl cut.
I mean... The bowl cut is really, really pronounced in this particular four issue arc. I mean,
very much so.
Yeah, they go full on with it, and it's really interesting because he's got blonde hair on the sides, but he's got red hair on the top.
And what's one of the several things that are different in this is that this origin has him with his father named Roland, which isn't the father that we see in the New 52 version. You know, there's a lot of changes that take place with that. You know, his origin is a lot different. He has a different family dynamic. He has a sister. In this, he does not have a sister at all. His family are all policemen. Mace is still there, and his father's still there, but his father isn't the same. I can't remember what the father's name is in the new version of the New 52, but he has a different...
And Mace died in this one.
Yeah, Mace kills himself at the end of this one.
Right.
But in this first issue, there's a lot of frustration in that Guy's father is this very working class, no nonsense kind of guy, and he's both physically and mentally abusive, and nothing that Guy does wins him any of the approval of his father that he's desperately seeking. And Mace can do no wrong. Mace is the jock. Everything he does is perfect. And Guy is basically just a nuisance and a bother from his father's perspective. And he's beat, physically, and there's a lot of mental abuse. It's kind of hard to read.
It was really tough. But I mean, so the last time I read this book would have been probably around the time it came out, if I'm not mistaken. Because I was trying to think about that today, and so that would have put me at 18. But the fact that his dad did as much verbal and physical abuse as he did on Guy, I mean, his mom, of course, just stood idly by and didn't do anything to lift a finger to help.
Right. And in the New 52, his father's name is Ebenezer Gardner, and he's a decorated cop. In this story, his father, Roland, is a factory worker. He's a blue-collar, working-class guy. In the New 52 origin, it's a family of cops, and you've got Mace, and you've got his sister, whose name escapes me now. But, he's got... His father's still kind of an abusive person in a way. He's maybe more emotionally distant than abusive. But in this particular iteration, he's physically, he hits a guy. He calls him no good. Nothing he does is good enough. It's very non-PC by today's standards. That's for sure.
Yeah, it really was kind of graphic in a sense, and I'm surprised they were, because it just had the comic code stamp on these back in that time frame, and I'm actually surprised they depicted that kind of stuff in this book.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of a bold choice, and what it does for me is it helps underscore why Guy is the way he is, because growing up, he was never good enough. He was always in the shadow of Mace, and when he becomes a Green Lantern, he's always in Hal's shadow. So I can see where he transfers some of that rage and anger onto Hal when he gets to be into the Green Lantern stage.
Well, and not only that too. I mean, this series adds a lot of depth to his character and his motivations moving forward. I mean, coming from an abusive father, losing his older brother, starting out being a juvenile delinquent, and then flipping his life on its head and going to school and doing everything that he did to his accomplishments, and then helping those that were in his same situation. That's a lot. That's a lot to unpack. I mean, you could do a whole podcast on that alone.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, when I got done reading this series again, I mean, considering how long it's been since I touched it the last time, I remember the New 52 stuff, but this stuff here, this 4-issue arc and his relationship with his family, I felt like it was more close to home. I mean, it felt more real, and of course it also made me kind of realize, okay, well, now I truly understand why Guy Gardner acts the way he does. Not the nuanced version that the New 52 created, which was a little bit more flowery than this episode was.
Yeah. One of the fun things about the letters pages in this series during the time was that they kind of wrote the editor's comments and such as if it was Guy writing them. So right. Some of his responses are pretty funny. And then they had at the end of the letters columns, they had, what's going on in the other Green Lantern books, and they were written from Guy's perspective. So there's a lot of cheap shots at Hal, and it's just a lot of fun. It's very humorous, neat stuff. But then when you jump into issue 12, you find out that Mace is basically on a pedestal that he doesn't really deserve. He's a druggie. And he tells his parents, I'm not going to go away to college, which was what everybody thought his future was going to be. And so Guy's like, oh, at last, Mace is going to do something wrong. But then Roland is like, oh, this is great. Your mom will be so proud. Nothing that Mace does upsets anybody, but everything that Guy does upsets his father.
Yeah, and he came home with this nice, cool science project. He was all excited about it, and his dad totally thrashes it.
Yeah, because it's sissy stuff from his father's perspective, and that mentality that he has. And this is juxtaposed with a Guy going back and forth between these flashbacks and trying to figure out how to escape the drawl, and he's with the other Green Lanterns trying to figure out how to get out, and he's trying to formulate a plan. And then we jump back into his past again, and Guy basically decides to become a hoodlum. If I can't be like Mace, then I'm going to be the opposite of Mace. And
jacks the car, steals the car.
Yep, he hijacks a car, and then he decides, he's figured out these psycho creatures who are feeding off of his mental energy. He figures out a way to insert himself into his own memories. So you have Guy in a car with the older version of Guy, the modern version of Guy, the adult Guy, sitting next to the teenager Guy. And it's almost like a scene out of Back to the Future with Biff. Yeah. And he decides, I'm going to alter my own memories and try to get myself free. And so you see Guy, the two Guy versions of Guys in a fight that Guy in his normal history had lost awfully. And in this time, he and himself win the fight. But yeah, Guy basically continues to go down the wrong avenue. And as you said in your coverage of Guy's history, Mace confronts Guy. Mace is now a policeman. We've jumped ahead a couple of years. Yeah. And Guy's got himself in trouble again. And Mace basically takes him into the football field and beats the snot out of him and says, you're going to straighten up and you're going to fly right. And Guy makes a very honest admission to himself and that his brother saved his life that night.
And it was really kind of touching because, right after that, he like I said, he just flips a coin and he's working, going to school. He turns over a new leaf.
Yeah, he basically throws himself at building his own future, even though he still doesn't have his father's approval.
Or anything from his mom, who doesn't say anything in the series.
Right, you're right. She hardly has a line at all. And it's interesting that, Guy throws himself in this action, and even though his brother saved him, and he loves his brother, and he idolizes his older brother, he's also jealous of his older brother because he has the one thing that he doesn't have. That's Roland's approval. And when you take that and you lift that dynamic up and put it on top of the Green Lanterns, Roland is like the Guardians, and Hal is like Mace, and he looks up to Hal and respects Hal, but at the same time, he's also the source of Hal's troubles because he can't measure up in the eyes of the Guardians.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. And juxtaposing next to what the Drawl are doing when they're trying to clone him, is what I'm assuming is going on here. He puts up a fight every time with them, but a lot of that I feel is his aggression from having those flashbacks, and still hanging on to those emotions and then lashing out accordingly.
Oh, definitely.
Right.
Guy goes, when he throws himself at his future and he's getting these degrees, he does, as you pointed out, he becomes a football hero like his brother. His college goes to the bowl, goes to Michigan State. He goes to a bowl game and he's the hero and he's making national headlines. And so he arrives home and he's kind of, he's a little cocky and stuff because he's like, hey, I'm going to be just like Mace and I'm going to get my father's adoration finally. And he finds his parents grieving because Mace has been shot while on duty and he's near death in the hospital. Of course, his father comes down on him because he's celebrating and trying to hog the spotlight and be selfish while his brother's dying.
Sad moment in the book, too.
Yeah, and that's issue 13. When we get to 14, Guy eventually ends up hooked up again, and we learn really the hard truth about Mace is that he's still a dirty cop. He's still dealing with drugs, and as his parents are there with him at the hospital and Guy is there, Internal Affairs shows up and basically says, when he's done, he's not going to be a cop anymore.
Imagine getting that bombshell,
right?
Especially with the dad the way he is, How much stock and faith he put into one son and basically just ignored and abused the other. And to know that golden hero just came down off his pedestal because he's a dirty cop.
Yeah, it's his life has changed, and when he comes out of the coma, he doesn't die in the hospital. He comes out of the coma, he is basically confined to a wheelchair. He'll never walk again. He's paralyzed, and he eventually commits suicide, and then Roland dives deep into alcoholism. And so Guy is like, I can't win. Nothing I do will get me the approval I need. I need to just go out and make my life. And so he goes out and, they show him counseling prisoners and he's teaching the sports to special ed kids. And then it jumps in and connects with where we first see Guy Gardner in issue 87 when when we see John Stewart get the ring, where he gets hit by the bus, and it touches a little bit on him coming out of that situation and going into this thing where he's actually Hal's back up, and then Sinestro blows up the power battery and puts Guy into a coma, and all of the things that we then find out through modern Green Lantern stories. But it really ties all that together, and of course in the end, Guy gets loose. But what has happened in the meantime is that the Drawl have set Guy Gardner free on Earth, and so Guy is actually interacting with the Justice League. And then after this 4-part story gets over with, it has Guy going back to Earth to confront his doppelganger.
Yeah, I need to continue this on because I haven't read this in quite some time, and it was kind of fun reading this because I like Joe Staton. I thought he did good work on it, and the art. I mean, say what you will about art, it's all relative to whatever you want to make of it. But I actually enjoyed it, even as goofy as it was at times. Especially with how goofy Guy looks. I mean, he's over exaggerated on all his features, even his jawline and everything, even his haircut. It's classic Guy.
Yeah, and I think that's very much. That's Joe Staton's art when you try to describe it. He can be a little over the top. At the same time, there are parts where he's not, and it looks great. But there are some parts where things seem a little over-exaggerated. But Joe Staton, legendary artist, I think Chuck Dixon really gets Guy's voice and understands the dynamic, just in crafting the story and lifting the dynamic between Guy and the Green Lanterns and putting it into a family situation, which makes it so relatable for people. And at the same time, for those that don't like Guy, suddenly you have a different take on Guy. I don't want to say you find him sympathetic, but you can suddenly understand where if suddenly you're put in a situation where your id has free reign, you might act a lot like Guy because you have a lot of pent up anger and frustration over all of the things that life has thrown your way, which weren't fair to you.
Well, not only that, the amount of baggage he was carrying with what he had to endure in his childhood.
Oh, definitely.
And coming out of that, I mean, you say what you will about. I've never experienced that before, so I'll never be able to relate to any amount of abuse or anything that's happened. But say what you will about how it's written, he comes out of it in an actual good way as a better person, and I think that he's overlooked in a character by that alone. I mean. Not many people can come out of this without having some kind of psychological trauma that drains them and brings them down. But Guy's the kind of character that just kind of uses it in his favor. That's what drives him. That's what fuels him.
Sure. I mean, some people can experience those kind of situations and they can fall into darkness with it. And some people can take it and use it as fuel, which is what Guy does. Is he uses his fuel to propel him above and beyond that, because he comes to that realization that I'm never going to get the approval I want, so I'm going to just have to be comfortable in that, knowing I'm not going to get it, and stop seeking it and live my life for me, which I think is a very powerful message.
Sure. Yeah, I wish I had picked up on that when I was 18 at the time. Or was that 19? It was 93 this came out, so it was about 19.
Yeah, it was 93. I was about 19 myself, and yes, it would have been very beneficial. I think I wished I'd had the maturity at the time to have picked up on those things.
Right.
Because I went through, I was not physically abused, but there was some mental abuse, and I never got my father's approval either, and I struggled with that, especially during those years. And I didn't see it in the story. You know what I mean? You lack the maturity to process it.
Well, and what really baffles me is, and as a father, and you yourself can relate to this, and any listener out there, I'll never be able to understand how you can disregard your son or daughter, in such a fashion that Guy was in this book. It's like, you may have an older son that you admire more, but to be totally dismissive of Guy at the same time makes it doubly bad as a father, because I don't understand how people do that. Yeah, I could never relate to how he was treated in here, because my father was always gave his approval, even when I sucked. I mean, because we all did, we all made mistakes, but I just, as a parent, I don't see how I could ever do that to Clark. I'd never do that to Clark. I can imagine how damaging it would be.
I think a lot of it is a cycle. I think it repeats itself, and it takes someone strong enough to realize I have the ability to break this cycle and can be the kind of person I want to be. And Guy is that kind of person, and I'd like to think that I was that kind of person when I kind of went through that with my own situations.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I mean, and like we said about this particular book, looking back on those kind of lessons and stuff, I'm just kind of wondering to myself why I never. I was so young. We don't pick up on these themes in comic books that give us real life lessons on an everyday basis and stuff like that. Of course, you look back on it, you're like, oh yeah, now I get it. Man, I wish I would have got it at the time.
Very true. Very true. But I think, this run in particular was really good. And this story ends right as Emerald Twilight is hitting and just as Mosaic is being canceled. So it's an interesting time frame to jump in and look at, but it's worth picking up. These issues are not very expensive. And if you really want to get to see Guy in a different light, because he's not a Green Lantern in this series at all. He's himself with a power ring and doing his own thing. It's really a good read.
I like this outfit. I thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah, it was neat. It was a playoff, obviously, on his Green Lantern outfit with the double-breasted jacket, but it looked good. The cowboy boots I thought were a little, but that's just personal taste.
Right.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed our coverage of this 4-part series. It really wasn't a series, but this 4-issue arc of the Guy Gardner series. And we'll take a quick break and come back and see what you guys have to say.
What's up, ring slingers? It's the Emerald Enthusiast. Join us on the Multiverse Musings Podcast Network as we cover all the happenings in the DC and Marvel universes and beyond, including the Emerald Echo Podcast, where we cover all the exploits of those who wield the green light. And also join us on YouTube for the Emerald Echo Vidcast, where your hosts Adam and I cover all the events that involve your favorite heroes, the Green Lantern Corps. So remember to join us on iTunes, Podbean, and YouTube for the Emerald Echo.
Hey, Phil, my power ring's going off. We got some messages. So, Power Ring, go ahead and let us know what our listeners have to say.
Our first message is from Donnie, aka the Emerald Enthusiast. His comment is about DC's round robin poll. Commencing playback in 3, 2, 1.
I'm heartbroken that Underworld on Fire lost in the tournament. DC dangled food in the face of hungry Kyle fans only to snatch it away at the last moment. I don't know why they want to see a big man cry.
Hey, Donnie, thanks for the comment on YouTube about the Underworld on Fire, the round robin tournament. As we found out since you posted that message, the Green Lantern book did win that whole round robin section. I'm not quite sure exactly how. The only thing I can think of is that the number of Instagram followers were enough because the Green Lantern book won on Instagram, lost on Twitter, and I think it lost on DC Infinite. But there were more users on Instagram that must have made up the difference because the Kyle Rayner Kilowog story is in the final 4. And for those that haven't been following it, there's a whole round robin tournament that they're doing where fans get to vote on these story arcs, and the final winner will get made into a series or a miniseries. And so there's been this last one. It was Kyle and Kilowog's story, Underworld on Fire, with art by V. Ken Marion and story by Cena Grace. Versus Zatanna story. And they apparently went out. They're in the final 4. The next round is against a Robbins book, which has been steamrolling over everybody as it's gotten to this point.
Yeah.
So it's not looking good, but they start doing the voting on the next round on May 5th. So when it hits, if you're on Twitter, check out DC's Twitter feed because you'll be able to vote in the round robin. You've also vote on Instagram, and if you have DC Infinite, you can vote there. So you can actually cast 3 votes.
I like the idea of how I don't know, man. I got mixed thoughts on this whole round robin thing. But that said, I would like to see a Kyle Rayner Kilowog book come out, but I'm not too optimistic that it's going to be Robbins because we all know how Batman sells.
Yeah,
and everything Batman. So.
I think that's the problem I have with the round robin thing is people aren't really voting for the stories they want to read. It's a popularity contest, and I've heard that there are Zatanna fans who are upset that it got beat by Green Lantern, so they're going to vote for Robins on purpose to knock it out, which I think is awful.
I mean, there you are. That's fans just being. I mean, I get it. I mean, nobody wants to see their book lose, but I'm not going to go out there and vote for something else just because my book lost. I mean, I got much more decorum than that. I mean, that's just a fan just being petty. What's the point of that?
Right. And I think that's the problem I have with some of these things to begin with, because you have people, this is going to be unpopular, I know, but forewarning.
I mean, that's okay. Have it out.
There are people that are going to vote for certain books, not because they're really interested in reading the books, but because they're voting for what characters are in the books, and not because they're fans of the characters, but they're fans of maybe some of the logistics of the characters. For example, there was a Justice League queer book, and that vote got a lot of votes that people didn't vote for the other books in the contest just on that particular one. And was it people who want legitimately to read that book, or is it people who are jumping on to vote for, I want a book with queer heroes in it? You know what I mean? You got people that are doing that, or, people voting for the Zatanna book. There are people that are calling the outcome misogynistic because a male's won. And I'm like, man, do we have to drag that kind of stuff into everything we do?
I mean, that's the problem with fandom, though, right? I mean, they like to pull different things in just to bolster their own argument, and I get it. I mean, but being a sore loser is not going to get. I don't know. I mean, I could say all kinds. Like I said about this tournament, I think it was poorly. I think it was poorly done. I don't think it was well thought out. I think it's just DC throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks to its fans. And how I felt, it was insulted by this thing because they clearly don't know what the fans want. If they knew their fan base, they'd write the books that people want. But they don't know what the fans want.
No, I don't understand why, considering the number of books that are being printed, why not take all of these books and give them, because these are all miniseries, they're not ongoing titles. Why not do them all anyway? I think the problem with the round robin, while it may sound like a creative idea to give fans some say in what gets printed, is the downside is you're giving fans the say in what's printed.
Well, yeah, and not only, I mean, how hard it is. Think about this. Indie comics, usually over at name anyone, Top Cow, all the other indie comics that aren't the big two. More often than not, a writer will do their own series, and it might be a 5-issue story arc, and then it's done. Doesn't exist again. It's done. It happens a lot in a lot of books. What's so hard about taking every one of these creative teams that have done all these titles and do a 4-issue arc on each and every one of them? It's not that hard. I mean, it costs money, sure, I get it. But at the same time, what do you gain? You gain fans. You gain a whole swath of fans. And then you can really, really see what went to work and say, okay, well, we got this Justice League queer book, all 4 issues sold out, copy 1, 2, 3. There's your gold mine. Okay, so start writing more. That, to me, is more beneficial than just saying, okay, well, this lost, so that creative team is out. Don't know what's going to happen to that writer and that artist now because who knows what we're going to do with them down the line. And now that book is gone. And then you pissed off your fans, that fan base for that book. I would have loved to have seen a Zatanna book. I love the character, but I think this whole thing is it's a sham. It's stupid.
Right. Well, you're being forced to choose between 2 books that you want to read.
Right. I mean, and I don't want to read a Robin book. So, of course, I'm going to vote for Green Lantern. But I'm not going to vote for something just to beat out Robin because I don't care that much. I just won't vote. It's pretty simple.
Right.
Okay, I don't read Robin. Why would I vote for it?
I think it would have been smarter to maybe have done these as all digital series, and then those that sold well digitally and there's demand for it, then release them in paper format.
That too. That doesn't take much. I mean, you've obviously already invested time in these creative teams that they came up with a concept or some kind of story arc, and they probably already gave you material that they've written. How hard is it to transfer that to digital and just put it up on your website? Okay, 99 cents. Done. I'll buy it just to try it for 99 cents. If I like it, guess what? Next issue is $1.99. Okay, I like the first issue, so I don't mind paying it. I mean, that's giving the readers decisions. Right. And that's giving the readers choices that they can obviously sit there and go, I want to spend my money on that. but I'm not going to spend my money on that. And then you weigh it out and see what sells and what doesn't.
Right. To me, it's indicative of some of the criticisms you and I have had over the leadership at DC, where nobody seems to have the confidence in the book to take a chance on them. So here, let's let the readers decide. Whichever one they think is the most popular will be the one we do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. We go back and forth, and we have for quite some time about DC's motives these days, and it just seems like it's muddled down, and they don't know what they want to do. And then I'm fearful for this whole comics driving the entertainment value. So you got comics that are now being written because of the movies and stuff like that. It used to be the comics itself, and the movie stuff was taken from the books. But like Aquaman, for example. Okay, well, he used to look a certain way, and now he looks a totally different way. I get it. I understand what that means, but at the same time, so that means that your audience that are going to the movies is driving those books. What happened to the comic books?
Right. There's this mode of thinking that a movie is going to drive somebody to go to the comic shop and pick up that character because they just saw him on the screen. And maybe some of that's true to some extent, but I think the audience is smart enough to understand that you're not going to get somebody who looks just like the person on the printed page, and why you would change the property to reflect that. I don't know. I guess it makes some sense, but I agree. There's a comment we're going to hear later on about that, about the relevance of comics when it comes to how they're adapted. So, but Donnie, I'm sorry it made you cry, but glad that you now have a smile on your face because Green Lantern won.
Take care, Donnie. All right, Ring. Well, let's play that next message because I want to hear what it has to say.
The next message is from JP via a comment on YouTube. He is commenting on the conversation in our last episode about Green Lantern #1. Playback in 3, 2, 1.
I enjoyed the book, but Phil makes some good points. I do hope that DC does something with Hal for Hal fans while this book is going on. And is that Tomar 2 in the background? There seems to be a few changes like this one coming out of death metal.
All right, thanks, JP from YouTube. I do try to make some good points. I don't know which ones will stick with like-minded fans, and I don't know which ones will piss anybody off for that matter, but I try to keep it as real as I can, and I respect everybody else's opinions just as I hope they respect mine. I'm hoping DC does something with Hal. I mean, who knows? I mean, his appearance in this issue was brief, so if a book doesn't come out from Hal within the next 6 months, I'll be a little bit worried. I'd be surprised that they'd shelf him for that long. A core book. I've always talked about a core book, and I will always talk about a core book because I think a Green Lantern core book would be vital to this franchise. But a lot of changes coming out of death metal, and I hate to say it, but I'm not on board with a lot of it. I just don't like the direction they're going in. But I will say the first issue of Green Lantern, the new Green Lantern book, I liked it. It was good. I'm not sure how well I'm going to like it down the road. It was the first issue, so I'm giving it a chance, just like I did with the Morrison run, and then I ended up loving it. I was skeptical at first of that, so I'm going to give it a fair shot. I'm going to give Geoff Thorne a fair shot, and if I'm sure Myron would agree with me if I pick up on anything that I don't tend to agree with or like with his writing style, then different story down the line, I guess, right?
Right. And your comment about Tomar 2 is accurate. I think that's Tomar 2 in the background because it's obviously too adult to be Somar Lee and too masculine to be Trilla True. And I don't know whether, I think you and I talked about it, Phil, when we did a review, that I don't know whether the artist knew they needed to have some characters in the background because there's, Muck Muck and a couple of other characters who are dead that show up. And I know we're in Infinite Frontier and there's all these possibilities, but at the same time, everything supposedly happened. So are they dead and they've come back, or are they dead and the artist, in looking for characters, Googled, I need some Green Lanterns. Oh, this one looks cool. Let me draw that one, not realizing they're dead. Don't know. You won't know until they're really addressed by name. I hate to think of it being an art mistake, but I don't have faith in the editorial to saying, hey, that's a dead character. You need to remove that character. I don't see them doing that kind of stuff. So you have to kind of just take it as it is. I mean, you could say the same thing during the Morrison run when Trilla True showed up. Where's Somewhere Lay? So, it's interesting. But, the book was okay. My problem is the fundamental part about the writer and what he's saying. And to me, there's just an integrity problem, and I have a problem with that. But anyway, so Power Ring, why don't you give us the next message and we'll keep on going.
The next message also comes from YouTube and is from Full of Mischief. His comment is also about Green Lantern #1. Playback in 3, 2, 1.
What's interesting though is it's the writer's job to approach even what they see as a boring character and infuse them with life. It's your job. If you can't take a fictional character and find a means to make them interesting, then you lack creativity.
Full of Mischief, I love the username. Sounds like someone after my own heart. And you're right. It is a writer's job to take what they see as a boring character and infuse them with life. I just don't think that Geoff Thorne has any interest in doing that. And I think the only reason why he'll use Hal Jordan is if DC tells him he has to use Hal Jordan, just like he didn't choose to use Teen Lantern, but they made him use her. So I don't think that Geoff Thorne is stupid. And I don't think he's going to write Hal and make him look bad. I think he's just not going to write him at all and ignore him and find reasons to keep him off the page. That's just my thoughts. But
well, he makes a good point about it's a writer's job to approach even what they see as a boring character. And I give that a lot of thought when he mentioned that. It's like you can invest and inject your type of what you want to see about the character that you haven't gotten, or you've gotten up to the point where you think he's a boring character, or whatever the case may be. Take for instance Batman. I'm not into Batman, never have been, probably never will be. If given the opportunity to write Batman, I would still hold on to the same ideals that Batman has always held on to, but I would also inject my components into the character itself to what I feel I would want him to be doing. And I think any writer should do that, as long as you don't stray away from what the integrity of the character is. Because people like Myron, myself, or any Hal Jordan fans, or Guy Gardner, it doesn't matter who, will pick up on those threads, and they'll see it. And but I mean, that's just my point. I mean, I think he makes a good point about the characterization.
Right, but especially if you're stupid enough to go on social media and say it. But anyway.
Oh, yeah, right.
But I think some of the things I've heard him say, I've heard Geoff Thorne say, is this story is really a John Stewart, Joe Mullane story, and while some of the other characters will fade in and out, it's really going to focus on those two characters. And so you might have some characters come in, you might have some characters go out. Part of what I think is going to be very interesting as this run goes on, depending on how long it goes, is that he has made comments that he feels he agrees with. And one of the things he and I both agree with, there are too many Earth Lanterns. And he's made the comment that not all of them are going to survive this. So I'm interested to see how fandom reacts once he starts apparently culling the herd, because the only thing he has said so far is that there are two Green Lanterns who are safe from being killed, and that's Hal and Rotlop Fan.
Well, if you notice this first issue too, and this is another point that I've brought up time and again before, a bulk of the lanterns that were in this book that were front and center, are not white in origin. I mean, John Stewart, Joe Mullane, the Teen Lantern. For the better part of, I guess his writing style, he's focusing on a lot of, the African American characters, and I think Geoff Thorne, if I don't know him that well, so I'm just going to be hypothetical here. I would assume he's trying to elevate John Stewart to a different kind of level, because we are in this hypersensitive social reality that is racism. And I think with Geoff Thorne being on the helm of a John Stewart book, I think that would be his ultimate message, and more props to him. I hope he does well with the character. Just because I don't like John Stewart doesn't mean I don't like the fact that Geoff Thorne is writing John Stewart. It just means I don't like John Stewart. I never have. I never invested that much time in him. So, But again, it's first issue, so I don't know what's going to happen 2, 3, 4, 5 down the line.
Yeah.
By 6, I could say, I'm done with this. I don't like it. I don't like where it's going.
Well, we know the power battery is going to go dark. That's going to happen coming up. I agree to a point. I think, to me, it would have been far more refreshing to have seen a John and Hal team-up book where you see a person of color and a white person who happens to also be Jewish, getting along and being a team and showing mutual respect and showing how people can work together as an example. Mm-hmm. That would be far more interesting to me. But anyway.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's hear what this next message says.
The next comment is also about Green Lantern #1. It's from Ulf. Playing message in 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, there are hints of a deeper John here, but it's still defaulting to the no-nonsense Marine. I'd hoped we'd moved away from Jeff Johns' power ring as a weapon analogy with Morrison's reclamation of the thing as a wishing ring, much more in tune with how it's been for most of the GL history, along with John's deeper characterization as a socially conscious architect. A big step back here.
All right, Ulf, thanks for the comments. By the way, cool name. Yeah, I guess defaulting to the no-nonsense Marine. I will say I didn't get a lot of the Marine. Well, I mean, I guess thinking back to that first issue, there was kind of a lot of leadership quality to it when he was taken. But it doesn't seem like it's heavy in his Marine persona. What do you think, Myron?
I kind of, I said it in my review when I wrote it, was that I felt like John to me is someone who's a little more tactical in his thinking, more thoughtful. And it bothered me that John never once chose to ask his ring, what the heck is this creature? Analyze it, look for a weakness. It was basically use the ring as a hammer and beat on the thing, and hopefully he beats it into submission until someone shows up and gives him a clue to help him get by.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And I think that goes part of what Ulf's comment is about the power ring as a weapon,
right?
Versus it being so much more than that. But
I mean, he makes a comment here, big step back here, and I on that aspect, I'd agree with him. But you can't compare. I'm sorry, but I just don't think you can compare Grant Morrison to any writer out there. That's a tough comparison to make. And there are two different types of writers. I mean, they're two very different types of writers.
Right.
So it's to put him up next to it is kind of unfair. But going to what Ulf said, if you're gonna stay true to your form, then I see what he means by the ring as a weapon. I don't agree with it. I like what Morrison did with it. It makes it feel more special, I guess you can say. It makes it feel like it is the most powerful weapon out there when it's not just limited to I'm going to use it as a weapon.
Right. What makes it the most powerful weapon in the universe is not the fact that it's powerful in terms of the size of damage output, but what you could do with it based on the creativity of the ring wearer. And John is far more creative than what we see in this issue. I think Thorne is really, Thorne's obviously read Mosaic and he's read all those other things, but he's really trying to channel John from the Justice League animated universe because that's what, at the end of the day, he believes that the bulk of your everyday non-comic book reading person is going to see or think when they think of John Stewart. So he's trying to cater to that audience.
And that's a smart play because that's where John Stewart gets a lot of his recognition from, since he was on that series. And that's not a bad way to go. And that's not a bad way to do it. I commend him for that. It's good for the character, and hopefully it gains more fans for John Stewart.
But I do hope that he shows more of the deeper aspects of things.
True.
I think it's an opportunity to expose those people that have only seen John Stewart in the cartoon to what this character is really about, because the John Stewart that's in that cartoon is not the John Stewart that existed on a comic book page.
Also worth noting, John Stewart has killed before. Mogo is named one.
Oh yeah, Mogo and what was it? Kurt? Remember Kurt?
Kurt, yeah.
He snapped his neck.
That's right. So he's not as innocent as everybody seems, and he's not he's not above any of the other characters. So,
right.
Anyway, moving on.
All right. So, Power Ring, we've got another message coming. So go ahead and fire away.
The next 2 messages come from Stuart. I will combine his feedback into one comment. Playback of the combined messages in 3, 2, 1.
To give credit where credit is due. I like the drama with the United Planets. And the reference to Mosaic is pretty good. But Thorne seems to be falling into the trap that the previous writers had, reducing the ring to just being a gun. And making the Guardians incompetent. The Guardians are supposed to be powerful and effective. But most writers depower them or make them useless for sake of the plot. Only Broom, Moore, and Morrison seem to get how the Guardians should be written in my opinion. Anyway, I could go on and on about how the Guardians have been mistreated as much as Fourth World haha. In my opinion, no movie or adaptation should rewrite or dictate comic history. Marvel is more infamous at doing this than DC even before the MCU. That's part of the reason I can't really support Thorne, as one of his comments was comics don't matter. Not saying you can't be flexible with the adaptations, but comics as an art form has plenty to offer even if they aren't popular. As Morrison said, we do stuff in comics that movies can't catch up with. But hey, maybe that's just me.
Stuart, thank you for your feedback. Greatly appreciate it. You point out some of the things that the positives that I found in the book as well. I like the United Planets. There's some potential in that whole plot line. I like the fact that he did reference Mosaic, because that's something that John's kind of overlooked. He didn't really go into that at all. But like you pointed out, and I think as we've already said, he's kind of fallen into some of the trappings that other writers fall into. I don't like the way he's doing the things with the Guardians. The Guardians certainly would not have let Teen Lantern walk around with a WMD strapped on her arm. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. But I also like the fact that you pointed out Broom, Moore, and Morrison do seem to do a better job with the Guardians. I didn't like how Johns did the Guardians either. I did in the beginning, but once we got past Blackest Night and he started turning them down the evil path, didn't like that at all. And your whole thing about the comics don't matter, that goes back to what we were talking about. One of the things that Thorne has said is that the comics don't matter to the general public. What matters is what's in multimedia, and so you shouldn't worry about referring to the comics as what you use as the source material. Do your own thing. And so that's part of what he said about the comics don't matter. He made that comment in reference to the fact that, well, John Stewart should be the Green Lantern in the movies because of how well received the DC animated series was. And what he fails to see is that if you go back and look at the history of Green Lantern in media, there are just as many people who watched the Super Friends as watched the Justice League animated series, if not more. And just you add up the number of people who watch that show, the Filmation cartoons, the Green Lantern TV show, how many people saw the movie, saw the advertising with the movie, the Mortal Kombat video game, the Injustice video games. I would hazard a guess, if you took a picture of Jon Stewart and Hal Jordan and showed them to general population, I think you'd be a lot surprised about how close it would be. I don't think it's this, John eclipse Hal in the eyes of the normal world, the non-comic book reading world. I don't think it's that as much at all. And I think that if we're not going to play respects to the printed material that supports it, then don't do it at all. That's one of the problems I have with some of the adaptations is they just take the nugget of the idea and then twist it into something that wasn't what people fell in love with it for. The reason why there's interest in a property and seeing it on the screen is because they want to see it the way that they read it. Not necessarily word for word and panel for panel, but they want to see the characters that they know and love. There's a reason why they're iconic. And
let's not forget that. I mean, if you're not going to draw inspiration from the comics, and you're going to cater to a certain degree of fans that aren't from isn't that kind of defeating the purpose of you writing comics? Then why would you write comics then?
Right.
If you're going to say comics don't matter, so why are you writing comics then?
Exactly.
How would you feel if somebody didn't use yours as source material for any future iterations of the character itself? Me as a writer, I'd feel kind of crappy, I guess. I don't know, but it's like, don't make a comment where you're going to sit here and say, stuff in the comic books don't really matter. I'm just going to focus on one particular item of that characterization. It doesn't work that way. Not only does it not work that way, that's not the sign of a good writer. A sign of a good writer can pull from multiple resources and write a fully developed character, genuinely introducing all those traits from those different media presences. that's a sign of a good writer. Not somebody who ignores stuff just because they don't like it. Sorry, I don't buy that.
Agreed.
All right, well, let's see what the next message is, because we're getting kind of wordy tonight, aren't we? We've got a lot of good feedback.
Yeah, no, I love it.
I know. Ring, play the next message.
Our next comment comes from depressed Green Lantern fan. He's commenting on the recent teaser that there is a new Black Lantern. Playback starting in 3, 2, 1.
Well, we know it probably won't be Kyle Rayner because he is still in the running to win that DC poll to get a series with Kilowog written by Sina Grace. I'd probably say it's Hal since he has nothing to do, Geoffrey Thorne hates him, and he isn't in any other events. A wild card guess would be Jade since she is in the series itself. Either way, I'm not excited about any of this. Lol. I'm still waiting to see if this current Green Lantern series will be worth sticking around after issue 3.
All right, well, thank you, depressed Green Lantern fan. I can honestly say I'm a little depressed myself because I'm not seeing Hal anymore. But into your comments about the poll, hopefully I'm pulling for Kyle Rayner in the Kilowog one. I'm a little sad because it's up against Robbins, and we all know how the Batman industry works. So fingers crossed. Comment. We've already talked ad nauseum about Geoffrey Thorne's hate for Hal Jordan. So I'm excited for this series. I want to get into it, and I want to make sure it develops in the right way before I can say I'm going to be excited for what's going to happen in the future of this series. But I'm going into it with fresh eyes, and I hope it goes how I want it to go, even though Hal's going to be missing. I can't say the same for Myron. I'm sure he has his own opinion.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go to it. I don't want people to get frustrated and tired of hearing me say the same thing, so I'm not going to dwell on it at this point. But I do hope that the Kyle Rayner Kilowog series makes it to the final. But I agree. I don't think that the Black Lantern we're going to see in Infinite Frontier is going to be any of the main Green Lanterns. I think it's a red herring. I think that it's I think it's a white glove just to make people think it's one of the Green Lanterns and to draw some attention to it. I think it's going to be a completely different character altogether. That's just.
I don't think it won't be Hal. I don't think it'll be Hal.
No, they would be nuts to do that. After all the brouhaha over Thorne's comments, I think Hal is as safe as can be.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, we've got one more message. So, Power Ring, why don't you give us the last message?
Our last message is for Robert, who is new to the podcast of OWA. Robert, welcome to the Green Lantern Corps. Commencing playback in 3, 2, 1.
I'm new to the podcast and was wondering if there were any episodes highlighting and deep diving into the Green Lanterns of Earth.
Hey, Robert, thanks for shooting us a line. We have not really done any in-depth dives into characters in particular. This episode is kind of maybe an exception to that because we did a story that was really Guy Gardner focused, but we have not done deep dive Green Lantern biographies per se. We used to do a segment where Bill Giancoli, our previous co-host, we did some segments where we wrote biographies and did like we were doing Skype calls to OWA to interview different Green Lanterns. We did a few of those, but we have not done deep dives into the Earth Lanterns, and maybe that's something that we start doing. We did Guy Gardner in this episode. Maybe Brother Phil. Maybe we do our Know Your Course segment on the rest of the Earth Lanterns for the next several episodes.
I'm game with that.
And maybe we do a little, maybe a little spotlighty thing or something, or maybe dive in deeper, have some deeper conversation about the character beyond the Know Your Course segment. I'm game for that.
Yeah, I'm game for whatever. We're flexible.
That's right. So thank you all for your feedback and your comments. It's great hearing what you guys have to say and what your thoughts are. Power Ring, why don't you tell everybody how they too can be a part of the show?
You can become a part of the show by leaving a message up to 1 minute long on our voicemail line. Call us at 406-POD-OWA. That's 406-763-6362. You can also email us at podcast@blogofowa.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Listen up, all you white circles. This is Drill Instructor Kilowog, and you're listening to the podcast of OWA. And don't you forget it, boozers.
All right. right, Myron and fellow Owens, episode 192 in the bank. Guy Gardner heavy, which I'm cool with. I'm kind of glad. And, one of our listeners brought up a good point about a deep dive into characters from Earth Lanterns. And, moving forward, that's going to give us something to think about.
Definitely, I think so. Maybe what we'll do, I was thinking about it during the break, is maybe what we'll do is instead of doing retro reviews, maybe we'll do character spotlights for a little while.
I'd be cool with that, because then we could talk about their first appearance.
Yep, maybe favorite issues that we have of that spotlight that particular character.
That's a different take on things. Yeah, that's something to consider. Something
different.
Well, the next time we record is, I guess, issue 2 will be out.
Yeah.
Is that?
I did that purely for dramatic effect.
No, that's cool. I really liked it. It was great. So it's not next week, but the week following, obviously, is when the next issue comes out. So we both know Myron's not looking forward to it at all. I mean, so I'm kind of looking forward to it, but kind of not. I don't know, man. I'm in this weird phase where I'm just not. DC is not doing it for me. As a matter of fact, my friend Brian and I we go back and forth about comics that we read, and I've just been digesting a lot of indie stuff, and different stuff off the fringe, like indie writers and everything. And so him and I both read the new Aliens book from Marvel, and he was trying to convince me. He goes, well, there's plenty of things to do over at Marvel if you ever want to jump ship and come over. And I'm okay with that, but my issue with that is I don't have any investment in Marvel characters like I do with DC stuff. It's not so easy when you got Wonder Woman, Superman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, all this time and investment that you've made in reading all these books to just jump over to Marvel and say, okay, well, what should I start reading? I've already seen all these movies, and I dabbled a little bit here and there in a lot of Marvel stuff, but there's no character that appeals to me that I just want to jump on and start reading.
Yeah.
You get me? Yeah.
Yeah, I've been focusing on rereading some of the older stuff, and I have some stuff that I bought that I have not read, there for a while. There's a chain, I don't know if this chain exists where you are, Phil, but it's called Ollie's. And they have had a lot of trade paperbacks really, really cheap. And so I've picked up some of the showcase editions of characters that I like Challengers to the Unknown. And I
love them.
Yep.
Yeah, they're one of my favorite groups.
They had a volume 1 and a volume 2. They're really thick books. They're all black and white. But I bought those, and I have not had a chance to read those yet. I've got a couple of books like those besides that of other characters that I've picked up that, I really haven't had time to sit down and read because I've been so focused on reading the new stuff, that stuff that I've invested in of older stuff that has just been kind of sitting there collecting dust is going to be something I dive into. I've got the Fourth World Absolute Edition Jack Kirby book.
That's awesome.
And I have not read those yet. And the second volume of that's coming out later this year. So I've got that to read as well. So I'm going to be, enjoying some of the old books and rereading books like today. It's been a long time since I've read those Guy Gardner books, and I forgot how much I enjoyed them. And they're just sitting in my long boxes waiting to be read again and enjoyed. So, if I don't find what I like in the new stuff, I can invest in rereading some of the old stuff and things I haven't read that's older. And I also can take the money I'm saving and backfill my collection, because I still have probably about 30 issues of the Silver Age book series that I don't have yet. So,
well, not to mention there's plenty out there to read. I mean, there's plenty out there to read. I mean, there's something for everybody. I just picked up Wonder Woman Earth 1 Volume 3, the Grant Morrison one, with the Yannick Paquette. Looking forward to reading that because I love those volumes. And by the way, I finally got my Volume 2 of Green Lantern Earth 1.
Oh, cool.
So I got all my hard books up there. Yeah.
Cool.
So.
All right. Well, friends, we will be back in a couple of weeks to be talking about some more Green Lantern stuff. Until then, stay safe. Treat each other well, keep that power ring charged, and make every day your brightest day. The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the blog of OA and the podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The blog of OA and the podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.